afternoon, everyone. I am absolutely delighted that you have chosen to join me this afternoon. I think it's fantastic. All these people, incredible. So I'm going to do some basic housekeeping before we start. We're on Zoom for an hour and a half. There will be a breakout session, breakout rooms, but this content can bring up some tricky bits and pieces for people. So if you need to turn your camera off, turn your mic off, you know, lie on the floor, do some breathing, whatever, absolutely fine. It's quite warm in the UK at the moment. Go and get a glass of water. Not a problem with that at all. If we are recording the session, so again, if you miss a bit, don't worry, you'll be able to access that afterwards. I won't record when we go into the breakout room. There's only one breakout session, but I won't be recording that bit in there. So people who haven't been to the session won't get to see the breakout rooms. I am going to, because Joan has said to me that, let's see if this works. Let me put this in, everyone in the meeting. Some people love to follow along with the slides, or love to have their own slides in case you want to work alongside those. Absolutely not a problem. I have put them in a G drive for you, so with any luck you should be able to access those. Joan's nodding. Can you everyone get into that? Yeah, love it when a bit of tech works as well. Cool. Let's just make sure. And there's a lot of you today. I am supported by the wonderful Joan. So if you do have a question, pop it in the chat. I will try and keep an eye on it. But Joan, I'm sure, will stop me if there's a question that I need to look at. Also, put your hand up. I'll try and keep an eye on that as well. I would like this to be as interactive as possible. I'm sure a lot of you have questions for this. So without further ado, hopefully, here's one I prepared earlier. So today we are talking about the repetition compulsion. Oh, no, enough. So sometimes I shouldn't be allowed tech. I set this up beautifully. And now, there we go, that's better. There we go. Talk about the repetition compulsion. That's what we're going to be doing today. But first of all, who am I and why should you listen to me? So my name is Julia Rogers. I am an ICF MCC accredited coach. I got accredited roughly nearly 3 years ago now, it'll be in November. And I am an EMCC Senior Practitioner and accredited coaching supervisor. And I did my ICCS here at Animas, or the ICCS as it's called. Just checking that I'm not missing anything. Cool. Right. I'm an accredited coaching supervisor. I have an absolute love of psychodynamics. So my master's I did in psychoanalytic studies in the humanities, where I looked at Freud and transference and the drive for transference, and that was about 30 years ago. And since then I've never stopped because I love it. It makes a lot of sense. Got my little cuddly Freud in my background there. That was a Mother's Day present from my daughter for me. I love reading a bit of Freud. Not a lot of people say that, but I'm going to give you some tips of where to start if you'd like to. I also have a podcast. One of my big beliefs in life is this stuff is tricky, and a lot of people like to keep it tricky. There's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on around this information, and it's my mission to actually make this easy to understand, because we are missing out if we don't use this information. If it wasn't for Freud, we would not be as far on as we are in the realms of self-help, of psychology, of coaching, of consulting, all these kind of things. If it wasn't for Freud, we wouldn't be where we are now. So bit of respect where it's due, I think. Do I agree with everything he said? No, of course not. But there's some really good mechanical stuff here. So yes, I have a podcast where I take everyday life scenarios and I say, why is this happening? why do we do this? So one topic that I did, why do I still feel like I'm being picked last for PE? Because even though it's a long time since I was at school, there are times when I still feel like I'm being picked last for PE. So why does that happen? So I do a lot of things like that, and I make it easy for us to understand. It's called the dynamics of everyday life, a bit like the psychopathology of everyday life, because I like to think that Freud would have approved. So that's who I am. Before we get going, a little bit of a group contract. There's 144 people in here, maybe a little bit less with, oh, Brenda, I love that you said that. I love that you've got on over it. I think I have most of the time, but sometimes it just comes back and gives me a bit of a pinch. There's a lot of us here today. So in terms of a group contract, you're going to be going into rooms to talk to people about things. The things that I want to ensure that we stay at today are confidentiality. What we talk about here, you know, particularly in the breakout rooms, stays in here. Be kind as well. We're all on different parts of our coaching journey, our learning journeys, how we're developing. And it's fine to have different opinions. I don't expect any of you to come away believing what I believe in this. I'm certainly not giving you this information in a kind of, you have to sign up to the School of Julia, or you have to sign up to the Cult of Julia. Not at all. I'm giving you this information, and in one of my favorite coaching phrases, do with it what you will. You know, pick it up, put it down, play with it. I really don't mind. I just want you to have the knowledge and the information around it so that you can make that level of informed choice about what you do around it. You know, respect other people's opinions, be kind. What happens in the room stays in the room. Is there anything that I've missed? Either pop your hand up or put it in the chat that you think needs to go in our group contract today. Use of AI note takers. That's a good one, Tanya. So what do we want to agree around use of AI note takers? Are people happy for them? Are people not happy for them? Sorry, I think mine not invited conscious. Any notes only for personal use? I love that, Emma. I think that's a great one. No AI in the breakout rooms. Absolutely. I think that's another one. Feel free to kick it out. Kelly, that's absolutely fine. Rather no AI tools in the room. Fine with me, except okay. I think the general consensus is quite a few people aren't happy with them. So can you remove your AI note takers? That would be really helpful, please. I don't know how to do this because
I'm actually removing the AI note takers because we don't allow them for security reasons. So when I see them, I just remove them.
Oh, Joan, you're fabulous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's that one. But this is when I first excuse me, when I first started training, I never had to think about AI note takers, and now I'm like, oh, what's going on? Anything else that we want to make sure we include? The other thing I was just thinking is, please ask whatever you want to ask. It's really important to ask whatever you want to ask, because even if you think something's a really basic question, I guarantee that somebody else is thinking about this. So Ali says, bring curiosity and use the opportunity to learn from each other. Absolutely. I mean, I run a separate training course on this myself, and I love what the students bring, because I'm like, oh, I never thought of it that way, or oh yeah, that's a great example. Absolutely. I will learn today as much as you will as well. And Sam had said responsibility for ourselves. Yeah, absolutely. I there's a lot of you in here, 150. I can't take responsibility in that way for you all. I can take responsibility for providing a safe space, but if you need something, please look after yourselves with this. It might bring up some tricky stuff for you. Just be aware of that. And obviously, if you need something afterwards, you know, you feel free to drop me a line, drop Animas a line, whatever. But we're going to be doing this in a psychologically safe way. Alice said as well, be mindful of allowing space for everyone in the breakouts. Yes, we're going to have a lot more breakouts than I thought, rooms than I thought we were, but that's good. Cool. Right, let's move on. So some key points to remember. I've started to touch on this already. This information can make us think in ways that we've never even considered before. We've never thought about this before, and it can bring up some unexpected thoughts and emotions. It's really important that you look after yourselves and do what you need to take care of yourself. If that means walking away and getting a glass of water, feel free. I want you to be able to do that. The other point that's really key for us to remember is we are not therapists. And this can be an incredibly easy trap to fall into. This material can be quite seductive because when we start to think about it, we're like, oh, well, yes, that means that. And oh, now I see why that happened. It can be, we can all fall into this trap, but we're not here to therapize. We're looking at this learning to enrich our coaching, and we want to be of more service to our clients. That's what we're there to do. If we're going to be, you know, let's be ICF competency specific, we're in that lovely evoking awareness stage. You could be at a point with a client where you offer something that's of a psychodynamic leaning, and the client goes, no, it's not that at all. Well, it's not our job to convince them. We go, okay, fine. Where would you like to go now? With that, we're absolutely, it's not our job to therapize. We're there to evoke the awareness. What people do with that, absolutely up to them. And it might be something that maybe they come, if you offer it in session 3, maybe they come back to it in session 5 or 6. So just, you know, hold it lightly. Our learning outcomes for today. So I'm going to go through some key psychodynamic terms, and this is so that we can all ensure that we're on a similar base level of understanding. And the reason that I do this is a lot of these terms have been diluted by everyday use. So ego, for an example, that has been diluted, and it's actually considered quite a pejorative term now. Oh, you know, so-and-so's got such a big ego. Oh, look at their, you know, what an ego they've got. Well, psychodynamic terms, we've all got an ego. Kind of need an ego to function healthily. So I'm going to just give a bit of a brief breakdown for what these mean, so that we've all got a baseline for understanding. We're going to look at what actually is the repetition compulsion. So we're going to talk about it. I'm going to do this mainly from the point of view of Freud. He is not the only person who talks about the repetition compulsion, but Freud is where things begin. So whenever I teach these concepts, I always start with Freud, because this is the foundation of psychodynamic learning. It's not the end of it at all, but it's the place to start. So it's a bit like, I don't know if any of you were old enough to remember when they did TV listings in magazines, and they'd advertise them and they'd go, other TV listing magazines are available. So other theorists are available, just in an hour and a half. I don't have the ability to go through all of them. We're going to look at how we see this in coaching, because all this is very exciting and very interesting, and quite frankly, I could talk about it all day, but we are here to think about how we do this in coaching. We're going to talk about how we work with this phenomenon, because it isn't just that, oh, I've spotted it and I'm not going to do anything with it. I mean, there are cases where you might not do something with it, but it's how do we work with it? And I'm going to give you a bit of a tool around that. And we're going to talk about some best practice ideas around how we would work with this. So that's what we're going to do with, that's what you're going to be coming away with. You have got access to the slides afterwards. You'll have access to the recording. So hopefully there's a lot in your goodie bag to take away with. Let's start at the very beginning. What are psychodynamics? So there's many different schools of thought that have actually developed from Freud's concepts. Freud starts writing, he's described as the father of psychoanalysis, and it really kind of starts with him. And we're thinking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he's the first person to start writing about the unconscious. He's writing about the unconscious in 1915. And the quote there is from the unconscious paper. At any given moment, only very little is contained in consciousness, which is a pretty big statement when you think about it. If there's only a small amount that's in our conscious minds at any given time, well, it might be quite helpful to know what's going on in the rest of our minds, or at least have an idea around it. The idea of the unconscious has been talked about before, even you know, way back when, in terms of you know, various BC scripts, etc. It's mentioned, it's referenced, but it's Freud who absolutely brings it to the attention of the general population. At the turn of the century, he's writing works such as The Interpretation of Dreams, The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious. And the reason that I mentioned these titles and their importance is because he's writing for the everyday person. He's not writing for an academic in a university. Now, he has a lot of discussions with other theorists. They do them through letters. If you ever want something to read or to understand about maybe the Freud and Jung relationship, you can read the Freud-Jung letters. They're, as a historical document, they're incredible. So interesting about how their bromance break down. Excuse me, but it really is Freud who's starting to talk about this, and he wants everyone to be able to understand it. He wants people to find this accessible. From his work, over the last 125 years, many schools of thought have developed from his concepts. So TA, for example, is a development from psychodynamics, and there's a lot of infighting. I have my own theories on that. But the main theme, excuse me, in all of this is the role of the unconscious in human behaviour. What is going on in our unconsciousness has an impact on how we behave as humans. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we start to look at this as coaches, because it will have an impact in every single coaching encounter that you have. It is worth having in the back of your mind what else might be going on. So we've got some key terms here. My Tasmanian devil is supposed to represent the busyness of Freud's mind, because he wrote over, I think it's 24 volumes of the standard edition. That doesn't include different papers or the letters that he wrote to different theorists, other essays, lectures that he gave. There's a lot there. But let's just look at some key terms so that we have an understanding. So we've got the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious. Now, the conscious mind, that's what we've got going on at the moment. So for me, it's please let the tech work, please let everyone be interested, please let, you know, make sure that I'm on time, I'm on track, I've not lost bits, all those kind of things. Am I being interesting? Am I relating it to coaching? All those kind of things. That's what's in my conscious mind at the moment. My pre-conscious, and again, this is Freud, you will hear other people describe it differently. My pre-conscious, now that's the bit that's kind of accessible, but I don't have it in my mind at the moment. So one of you could say to me, what did you have for lunch today? And I'd be like, oh, I had a cheese sandwich and some chocolate rice cakes. That's what I have. That's what I have for lunch. It's not in my mind all the time, but I could quite easily get to it. I used to describe this as phone numbers, but obviously as we all live with mobile phones these days, nobody remembers a phone number in the way that we used to. The pre-conscious is a little bit like having a bag next to you on the floor, and if you need something, you just reach down and pick into it. So you can get it quite easily, but it's not there all the time. Freud doesn't like the term subconscious because for him it's too vague. Well, is it unconscious? Is it preconscious? What is it? Make your mind up. What's going on here? So he will never use that term, subconscious. Other theorists do, but he doesn't, and that's for the reason. And then with Freud, there's the unconscious, which for him is the much bigger part of our minds. If you think of it, he describes it as like an iceberg, and you've got the conscious bit at the top, tiny bit poking out, preconscious just beneath the waterline, and then the unconscious is the whopping great bit of the iceberg underneath that's steering the ship. And that's where all the stuff that we don't have in our conscious mind gets repressed, gets dumped, gets shoved into there like a big old washing machine, and we carry that around with us, not often having an idea of the impact that it's having on us. Every single one of us has this structure, and it will impact our lives in different ways. So that was his first idea of the mind. He then comes on to the id, the ego, and the superego. Very briefly, because we don't need to go on into this in too great detail. We have the id is the primitive and the instinctual bit like Tasmanian devil. It wants what it wants. When I teach this, I often teach the id, the ego, and the superego in terms of Scooby-Doo. So the id, that's like Shaggy and Scooby. They just want their needs met. They want to eat food. They don't care. They're running away from ghosts and eating. Job done. We've then got the ego. Now, that's the bit that moderates between the id, which is all the passions, all what I want, the pleasure principle, basically, and the superego, which is more your Fred. So that would be Velma in Scooby-Doo. She's always trying to moderate between Fred and Daphne and Scooby and Shaggy. And then we've got Fred and Daphne, who are the superego. They want to do the right thing. They're the moral conscience. We are going to do the right thing. Velma, she's kind of being realistic and mediating between the two. So that's the id, the ego, and the superego. There are lots of kind of ways that we can differentiate those, but for what we're doing today, that's enough. We've got defense mechanisms. Freud writes a lot about defense mechanisms, as does his daughter, Anna Freud. Defense mechanism is such an interesting thing to talk about. We have things like denial, repression, sublimation, displacement, projection, projective identification. We have defense mechanisms because we don't want to feel anxiety. You know, the mind will do anything to avoid anxiety. We don't want to feel these difficult feelings. So we have defense mechanisms that will stop us from doing this. Now, in coaching terms, would we go in and dismantle a defense mechanism? No, not necessarily. I do it with care, because sometimes we have defense mechanisms for extraordinarily good reason. So really important. But I could talk about defense mechanisms all day. Transference and countertransference. So these are really important concepts that Freud initially thought were pretty much defensive behavior and no more important than that. As he developed his theories, he started to realize that actually these are pretty fundamental parts of how we respond in the consulting room. We've got instinct and drive. Now, instinct, he initially thought that was biologically hardwired behaviors, and we follow predictable patterns. Let me just check the chat. Oh, good question. Are defense mechanisms only for defending against anxiety? Freud would probably say yes. I think they are for defending against difficult feelings, which possibly lead to anxiety. I mean, I love talking about defense mechanisms, so I don't want to get sidetracked, but we have defense mechanisms to help us survive, basically. They keep us alive, in that the brain's main job is to keep us alive. It's not for getting PhDs in rocket science, no matter how much we might want to. It's to keep us alive. And it keeps us alive by repeating patterns, which is something we're going to come on to. The behavior it's learnt, it knows that if we respond in a certain way, then we will, it's safe for us. So let me think of an example. An example of a defense mechanism would be displacement. So displacement is where we move our feelings. So it might not necessarily, the initial view might not necessarily be anxiety, but it's always down to it causing anxiety. So let's say a child gets told off in school by his or her school teacher, and they're angry because they don't think it's fair. But they can't show that anger to their teacher because for them, socially, it's unacceptable. They would get told off by their teacher. Their parents might find out. It'd be incredibly difficult. So what the child then does is they go out into the playground and they punch another child. The child just stood there going, well, what have I done? And that's a displacement. So it's moving. They're not, the person who's done the punching isn't going to feel as anxious for hitting another child, as they would hitting the teacher. That makes sense. Let me come off. Thank you, that makes sense, great. I mean, there's so much more we could do on defense mechanisms, but I'm quite conscious of time. Cool, instincts and drive. So yes, as I said, yes, absolutely. It's about protecting the psyche from pain. We don't want to feel pain. So hands up, my favourite one is rationalisation. My go-to defence mechanism is rationalisation. I will rationalise until the cows come home. And I'm the mother of 2 children. I mean, they're older now, but when they were in primary school, you would see rationalisation going on like nobody's business, because you don't want to think your children are going to behave badly. So if they have behaved badly, I would rationalise my children's behaviour away. I'm like, well, they did that because they were hungry, or they were tired, or that other child pushed them, or something like that, because I don't want to feel the pain of thinking my children have behaved badly or my children are unhappy. So that's, you know, rationalisation. It's one of my go-tos. Cool. So instincts and drive. Instinct, initially saw by Freud as biologically hardwired. It's in there. It's a predictable pattern. Whereas a drive is much more, it's not necessarily a fixed behavior. It's more psychic energy. It's more, it builds up, it demands release. It's a bit more fluid. So for instinct, think nature. For drive, think psyche. But again, remember this, I'm just starting with the basics of Freud. Alec, transference and countertransference is in, yes. So parallel process is a form of transference. So it's a bit like a Russian doll, if you think about it that way. Parallel process is in the doll of transference, but transference isn't all parallel process, if that makes sense. Arnella, I hope I've said that correctly. Yes, that is correct. The problem with defense mechanisms is we can actually be doing something where we feel uncomfortable, we're not happy doing it, but paradoxically, it feels comfortable doing that because we understand that pain. I'm going to talk about this more when we come on to the nuts and bolts of the repetition compulsion. Okay, right, transference and countertransference. Okay, I'm going to do this strictly from Freud, okay, because there are different views on this. So transference. Transference is where you repeat a behaviour that is appropriate to one of your primary caregivers, generally speaking, your parents, with somebody that's not one of your primary caregivers. So it's inappropriate to the situation. So one example would be when I was doing my MCC accreditation, I had an MCC mentor, Giuseppe. Now, quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, he is the greatest coach that ever walked the planet. To me, he just like oozes ICF competencies out of his every pore. At one point, I looked at myself and I thought, why have I got all my notes lined up? I've got everything highlighted. I should have had an apple for the teacher. And I realised that I was actually having a positive transference to him as if he was my father, because I wanted to impress him, because that was it. It was over the top, let's say, that I was really wanting to impress him. That was a transference response. Now, countertransference from the Freudian perspective. Now, Freud doesn't really like countertransference. He's like, just go and get analysed, you'll be done with it. It's your response to the patient or the other person's transference. So if Giuseppe had responded as if he was my dad, that would have been him in countertransference. So he wouldn't have been responding to him as me, to me as him, sorry. He wouldn't have been responding to me as me. He would be responding in a different way. So that's a very Freudian kind of almost like clean version of it. Some people believe that countertransference is the practitioner's response to the client. So this is why it's, you know, you might think, oh, hang on, Julia's told me this, but actually I've read it somewhere else as this, and that will happen. So that's why I'm giving you, like, we're starting with Freud, we're starting with the basics. Anything over and above that, it's a bonus. Does that help? Yes, Brenda, you have understood that correctly. It is, I'm repeating the behaviours that I would have had with my dad, which is literally, you know, how well can I do in school? He was a headmaster. That's where it comes from. So let me get all the badges, let me do everything I can, and then I'll get my dad's approval. But, you know, for Giuseppe, yes, he wanted me to get my MCC, but he wanted that for me, and he wanted it because of our professional relationship, not because he wanted to be in some kind of dynamic with me. And interestingly, even though I knew that, he was the first person after my husband that I told that I got my MCC. So countertransference as the coach's assumption, yes. So it's very similar to projective identification. Cool. So repetition compulsion. This is so exciting. I'm loving that you're getting into this. Right. Freud starts writing about the repetition compulsion before he names this, and he actually does this with quite a few concepts. He starts to kind of play around with them and notice that something's going on, and before he actually gets to grips with it. So he starts writing about the repetition compulsion in 1914 in a paper called Remembering, Repeating, Working Through. He really starts to write about it properly in Beyond the Pleasure Principle in 1920. But what he's talking about is, instead of patients remembering repressed material, they're not sitting there going, oh, so actually what happened when I was 4 was this. They reproduce it not as a memory, but as an action. They repeat it without knowing, of course, that they're repeating it. So to use my example with Giuseppe, there was some repetition compulsion going on in there. I was literally repeating what I would have done with my father. You know, look at this, Dad. Look, see how hard I'm working. I'm working hard so that you're going to approve of what I'm doing. That's what was going on, and it was a while. It was a couple of months before I recognised what was going on. But what's happening in here? And again, this is Freud. There are other people who've written about this. So for Freud, there's an unconscious need to reenact early traumas. And what this does, it does include us putting ourselves into situations where the event is likely to happen again, even if it's traumatic. And I think sometimes people can find this a bit challenging. You know, why am I putting myself into something that wasn't very much fun in the first place? We repeat as opposed to remembering because we're trying to master what's going on. And like with my example with Giuseppe, it is likely to occur in transference. It's absolutely, it can be part of the transference relationship. It's not all of the transference relationship, but it can be very much part of it. There can be an unconscious need to suffer, which again sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but what we're doing there is we're trying to make things better. We're trying to recover a problem that we had before. We're trying to fix it. It's instinctual. It happens to all of us. And the other really key part here is we are taking an active part instead of a passive part. So in the initial incidents, maybe in the initial trauma, we had very much a passive part, whereas we're in the repetition compulsion, we are taking very much a passive part with the hope of improving things. So about the same time that he introduces the concept of the repetition compulsion, he also talks about the term destiny neurosis. And he uses this term, he talks about it in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and he's describing a repetition of painful, self-defeating life patterns that seem to occur outside the person's conscious control. So it's as if the person gets caught in a loop. They're drawn again and again into these similar relational failures, these losses, these crises, as though almost they're destined to suffer in the same way, despite what might seem outwardly their best efforts. So he introduces this, like I said, in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, 1920, and he's linking it to the much broader idea of the repetition compulsion. So what he does is he starts to notice that some people, they seem to fall into the same unhappy relationships over and over again. They repeatedly fail at key moments in their careers. They maybe experience recurrent loss or betrayal, even when their circumstances have changed. And he writes that such individuals seemed pursued by a malignant fate or possessed by some demonic power. But Freud doesn't really believe in fate or magic in this way. He believes that these are psychological repetitions, they're compulsions, and what we want to do is we want to master these unresolved conflicts or traumas from earlier in life. Just trying to see. There we go. So what's happening here? So early relational wounds, often with our caregivers, not necessarily the case, but generally speaking with our caregivers, they're internalized. We take them in psychodynamic terms, it's called introjected, but internalized works just as well. And instead of being fully remembered and processed, they're enacted unconsciously throughout our adult life, in situations that cause us to, be drawn back to the same emotional feelings. We're going to reenact these. And it can also be that the person chooses or is drawn to situations that recreate the original pain, often hoping, without realizing, that maybe this time it will turn out differently. Now, this always makes me think of one of my favourite songs in the film, in Cabaret, Liza Minnelli singing, "Maybe this time I'll be lucky." But because it's unconscious behaviour, it's not going to be, is it? We have this, the amount of situations where we've all been in and we think, maybe this time it's going to come right. Maybe this time I'm going to get it sorted. Maybe this time it won't have the same ending. So it's such a common human event. So some everyday examples that we've got of the repetition, compulsion, and action. Chances are you've had some of these in your coaching sessions. I always end up with the same kind of boss. Why does my boss treat me this way? Why are they always responding to me this way? Why did they always tell me off this way? I give everything to people and they still leave. Why do I always end up being the person who fixes everything? Why do I always end up being the person who buys the tickets when we go out? Why am I the person who always organises everything? Why am I the person who always keeps these friendships, relationships functioning? I keep choosing partners who don't really see me. I keep choosing, partners who, whatever, run off with my cousin's milkman's dog walker. Why does this always happen to me? I get bored and leave, and then I regret it. Also, there can be generational cycles of the repetition compulsion. We pass ways of being and we pass ways of understanding the world down through our families. And you can see these cycles repeating over and over and over again until somebody goes, you know what, no, I'm done, no more. So that's why we see it a lot in coaching and in everyday life. And I suspect you've probably seen some yourself. So we don't need me talking at you for an hour and a half. Any questions before we go into a breakout room? So Jung does have some ideas on the repetition compulsion. I am going to hold my hand up and say I am much more Freudian than Jungian. Jung is actually, he's relatively quite similar to, yes, this complex. He's quite similar to Freud in terms of the repetition compulsion. You find as the theorists get further and further away from Freud, the more they develop their own ideas around him. But today I am absolutely sticking to Freud, because if there's a lot of us, and we it would be too tricky for us to go into young as well, much as he's got a lot of interesting stuff to say. And as a tangent, I will look for it in the breakout rooms. There is a fabulous, if you've never seen it, a fabulous BBC interview. It's on YouTube with somebody talking to young. It's very, very BBC British. Honestly, just culturally, it's hilarious. But they talk very, very poshly, and they have very, very, what's it called? Received pronunciation. Oh, it's an iPlayer. Yes, you're right. Sorry, all your chats disappear so quickly. Ben, you're right. It absolutely is. It's on iPlayer. So look up Young interview. I think it's in the 1950s, 1960s. I love the way he speaks. He talks about professional courtesy as well. It's a lovely video to watch. Let me just check here. Yes, Alice, I think there's a lot of research to be done around neurodivergence and psychodynamics. It's not something that I've read a huge amount about, but I think there's a lot to do there. Yes, the repetition, that's absolutely true. The repetition compulsion creates a situation that we are familiar with. So our brain's like, hello, I know what I'm doing now. This I can cope with. Even if it's horrible, even if it's a horrible situation and it causes us pain, we know what we're doing. And actually the pain of being in a situation where we know what we're doing, as opposed to being in a situation that we have no idea about, it's a lot easier. How are we going to use this in coaching? This is all very exciting, but how are we going to use it? What's going on for us? So, as we've touched on already, we're going to explore those repeated patterns in the words. There's something coming up a lot here. You mentioned this a lot. Can I just check in with you? What's going on here? There's a lot coming up. Checking with those ICF competencies, we're going to evoke awareness. Can I make an observation? You come back to this a lot. I had a client I've worked on and off with for quite a few years, and every time she has a relationship breakdown, the same thing happens. She thinks they're going to get back together in 2 years, every single time. And it was only after this had happened about 3 or 4 times, I was like, can I make an observation? You use this phrase every single time. And she went, oh, I do, don't I? I said, I don't know whether you're going to get back together in 2 years or not. I really have no idea. And that's not for me to comment on. It's interesting that what do you think might be going on here? And so we were able to use that because it was really useful data that she was coming up with. We're going to think about the energy and the focus of where our clients is going. Really important. What are they? So like with my client, she was going back to thinking about getting back together. That's where her energy was. Even if she'd ended the relationship, this was the other interesting thing. Even if she had ended the relationship, she always came back to this. We're using it to inform our questions. But remember, we're not diagnosing. It's to inform our questions and to share theory with our clients if they are interested. Some clients love a bit of theory, others not so much. So that's a useful thing to check in with you in your discovery calls. How do you feel about a bit of theory? Do you enjoy it? Are you interested? If you're not, I don't mind either way. I want to know how to work with you. So, best practice. Notice the pattern with care. We are not stumbling in going, well, you know what your issue is. You're repeating that, aren't you? Over and over again. Look at that. We're not doing that. Offer it to the client. The client might find it tricky to look at. It's not our job to convince them. We're interested. We are curious. We are not clinical around this. Remember, this is somebody's life that you are talking about and their choices. And let's be human around this. We're staying in the relational zone. Remember, preserve your relationship with your client. Now, for me, you can't coach somebody if you don't have a relationship with them. So, really make sure you're staying in that. This is not hierarchical. This is a partnership. It's also not bad behavior. People aren't doing anything wrong. We all do this. It is a common human practice that we all do. It is not bad behavior. There can be something missing. for your client. I think one of the breakout rooms gave some of their feedback was like, what needs aren't being met? What are you going back to over and over again because you know, maybe a really fundamental need isn't being met? What could be different? How could you do these things differently? What could be different is I could have a camera that works, but that's more tech failings. So what could be different? How could you change this? How could you get your needs met? How could you approach this from a different angle? So some key points that we need to remember when we're working from a psychodynamic perspective. I'd always advise your clients, if this is an approach you choose to use, always advise potential clients that it's an area that informs your coaching. You might not. It might not be something that you come to in the sessions, or you might hold it in your mind, but you might not share it with your client. Always check in with your client. So this is something that informs my coaching, whether it comes into our sessions or not. I just want you to know that it's there. Have a think about whether we need to mention our interpretations or observations for the client. Are we doing it in service of the client? Because remember, it's always in service of the client, or are we doing it to make ourselves look clever? Yeah. Is it actually something that you maybe pop on a mental post-it note and go, I'm going to talk to my supervisor about that, because I'm not sure how I address this. I'm not sure if it's relevant. I'm not sure if we're going down a rabbit hole here. So think about how you're doing it, who you're doing it for. Think about how you're going to do it, and always talk to your supervisor or your mentor about it. Now, bit of a handy guide here. I have given you've got all the slides, so you can come back to this. This is one of the ways that we can do it. One of the ways. So we're going to look for some clues that a repetition compulsion might be at play. So the client starts to describe some patterns, some recurring patterns across different relationships, their jobs or situations. And maybe the same emotional themes keep re-emerging. So maybe they're feeling dismissed, they're unseen, they're responsible, they're abandoned, they're unloved, they're unincluded, whatever. The client maybe repeatedly takes on the same role. Maybe, you know, to bring a bit of TA into it, maybe they're the rescuer, maybe they're the victim. Maybe they're also the rebel, the outsider, the fixer. Then maybe there's a mismatch between their conscious goals and the situations they keep creating. So they come to you, they go, I want to work on this, and then spend their entire coaching journey with you avoiding it. You know, maybe there's something going on there. And maybe you, the coach, you start to find yourself being pulled into familiar dynamics. You know, maybe you're being pulled into rescuing or pleasing, withdrawing, defending. You know, maybe there's some kind of you find yourself being pulled into something. You're like, this is not where I want to be. So then we reflect on this as a coach. Supervision, absolutely key here. You know, think about what feels familiar, not just to them, but to you. You know, what are they repeating in their sessions? What do you sit there and think, I'm sure I've done this session before with them. I'm sure we've been in this situation. I had a client who was frustrated at work because she never felt to get any higher. But then every time she went for a job, she went for the same level. And it was like she was repeating being in the same situation, getting frustrated that she couldn't get any further on in her work, but she was never taking herself out of that position. Senses of deja vu, content or emotional tone. What emotional relational roles are being played out in the coaching relationship? You know, ask these questions to yourself. Start to think, what might the client be hoping to resolve or repair or redo unconsciously? What might be going on for them? As always, work with care. So some possible gentle ways that you can bring this to the pattern. Notice the pattern, like questions that you've already been bringing up. This feels like something that might have come up before. Is that fair? I'm wondering if this is a familiar experience for you. Can I check this with you? Can I make an observation? It feels like this is a pattern going on, and I wonder if you see this pattern too. You know, what do you hope will be different this time? Or what do you plan to be different this time? That question, I think you need to ask that one with care, because it is it can sound a little judgy. But again, it's, I think it was Dagmara who said about, you know, it's the relationship with the client. Ask your questions with care. And then we're looking at how we can create the space for something new. So again, back to those, basic is perhaps unfair, but, you know, really good, solid coaching questions. What haven't you tried yet? If this were the start of a different kind of story, what might it look like? Or what would you like it to look like? How could we work differently together from what you're used to? What can go on here? What do you want to be different? Maybe what are you afraid of? What do you think's holding you back? What do you think's helping you get stuck? Now, as always, you will know your client best. So you know, use the questions lightly, and also ask questions that work well from you, if that makes sense. So I can ask a question, it can sound brilliant. Somebody else can ask a question and it can sound awful. Vice versa, somebody else can ask a question, it can sound brilliant. I can ask a question and I can sound like my father standing over a naughty teenager. So I'm just going to go back. Do you ever ask about what the client's repeated thoughts are? Matthew, yeah, if relevant. I wouldn't say I would never do that. It would just be if I felt it was relevant to where we were. Yeah, I think asking what does that mean to you? Great question. Oh, yeah, lovely, Gaia. Yeah, it is sensitivity. We cannot be barging in with this knowledge and going, well, you know what your issue is, don't you? That's your problem. This is tricky stuff. When this stuff gets brought up with you, think about how you might feel if someone was bringing something up for you that you'd never heard of before. It is about raising awareness. It absolutely is. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Michelle. Sometimes it is past behaviour shown by past reinforcement. Yeah, you are not your past. Absolutely. Katrina, are there continuous educate? You would have to ask Animas for that. Tanya, this is also interesting. Can we have a follow-on session building on this, please? So that would be for Animas to deal with. I am just here as a one-off. I do have my own Essential Dynamics for Coaches course, and there is a QR code for that if anybody is interested. You can come and learn about that more with me, but that is not an Animas thing. That's my thing. So that's a QR code for that. I'd love to say that was all my own work. I've got a lovely VA who does all the tech stuff for me.